I'm Paul Damasio from Jackson SWCD Conservation District. This is part 2 of irrigation presentation. This one is the on-farm irrigation overview improvement options. I'm going to look at all the different types of irrigation systems, throw them all out there, look at different improvement options, where to begin, and how to get some grant funds to potentially cover the costs of those options. All right, next slide. So it depends. Decided on many types of things, type of your system. Crop type, crop needs, you didn't see any hemp guys out there irrigating the big things. They're all using drip. Field characteristics. What type of soil do you have? Do you have clay, heavy clay, or do you have sand? If you have sand soil, you can't really flood irrigate very well. Water availability. Do you have water on demand, or is it only on rotation? You get a big slug of water, or do you have access to a little bit of water over a long period of time? What's your experience and user preference? If you grew up on a farm that had hand lines, you're probably going to want to continue using hand lines. That's how it is. Contractor preference. What does the contractor have available in the area for materials, whether local distributors or the type of system you want? What is your labor availability? Who's going to actually be moving the system around? Is there anybody to move it around? Do you want to be able to not have to flood irrigate throughout the night every 3 hours? For your lifestyle, you want to be able to leave for a couple of weeks and be able to tell somebody else to irrigate for you? Or are you going to be staying on your property throughout the entire irrigation season? What is the cost of your water and the cost of your electricity? What type of animals are out there on the field, meaning livestock, but also wildlife can have an effect too. And then there's probably some other considerations. Right, next slide. Characteristics, you got a flat rectangular field with nice loamy soils, green life, continue on, you can pick pretty much whatever you like. Irregular shape, steep slopes, heavy clay, or really sandy, you've got some fewer options. You need to think a little bit more about the system you're going to put in. Next slide. So flat options, you can flood irrigate pretty well with this furrow and these siphon pipes. This happens on thousands and thousands of acres down in California still. That can be 90% efficient, especially if you pump the water back up into the ditch.
I thought flood irrigation lost a lot to evaporation.
Flood irrigation actually loses a little bit less to evaporation because there's no water droplets in the air.
Oh, okay.
But flood irrigation is harder to manage for deep percolation below the root zone.
Tends to stay on the surface and then run off after.
Because you can't just apply, you're not like applying an inch of rain. You're flooding it, and that flood water is kind of moving out, and the flood water advances down the slope. So then you get on the root zone.
Yeah.
Then you get sometimes more water at the beginning because you're flood irrigating that longer than you are at the end.
So my farm is set up for flood irrigation. I've got concrete troughs running the entire width of the property with pipes every so often.
Sure.
And you could flood irrigate with no use of the pump, no electricity, no labor other than opening and closing valves.
Yeah.
And
they're designed right, it works really well.
And it would be done for hay primarily. not
Yeah,
for
if it's
row-
designed
not for
right.
row crops.
And if it's maintained well, it can be fairly effective and efficient. But if it's not, and if it's a wild, I'll show some of the pictures too. If it's not maintained, it can be 30% efficient. And you always usually have runoff. Flood irrigation, to be efficient and effective on your whole field, you have to usually have some runoff.
At the far end, yeah.
Wheel line sprinklers, solid set, pods, a lot of different things you can use. Big gun cart. Big gun on a cart. That's being pulled around. Drip system. Wheel or a center pivot or a linear move that moves automatically. It's like an automatic wheel line. Those sprayers under your orchard. Irregular clay, steep, you might do some drip, pod systems on some irregular shaped fields. Solid set, different areas, more drip. So I'll go over some more examples here. 3 basic irrigation types: surface flood irrigation, sprinkler irrigation, and drip or micro irrigation. And I'll cover more examples of each one of these. So flood irrigation, this is wild contour flood irrigation, and Little Butte Creek watershed. And they've got a lot of cattle out here. This is pasture. And these dry spots are areas where they can't get the water to. They've got all these spreader ditches throughout the field. They've got their main canal up here with different gates. They've got a bunch of different ways to get water into the different ditches. It's not very efficient. This is a steep slope. It's heavy clay, and it's not level. It's not laser level at all. It's not very efficient. There's a lot of runoff. Flood irrigation delivery for this. We were talking about this earlier with somebody. You got 1 CFS on your flow rate onto your field, and your gate is open for 1 hour. You're going to give your field 1 inch of water on 1 acre. So this is what all these rotations and hours of rotations is based on.
So you got 40 acres, you'd leave it open for 40 hours?
If you've got 40 acres, you would leave it open for 40 hours to deliver 1 inch with 1 CFS. You leave it for 1 inch. All right, next slide.
Did it go?
Go back.
Oops, sorry. One more.
Back to So typical delivery for irrigation, for flood irrigation, usually about 3 inches of water.
Wow.
And so if 1 acre field is irrigated for 3 hours, for 1 acre field will be irrigated with 1 CFS for 3 hours to be 3 inches of water. 1 acre field with 1 CFS.
And is that flatland or does it matter?
That doesn't matter. That's how it's calculated. And that's how the rotation is based on the hours. And it changes based on the CFS, how much water you get. You're actually pulling out of your tank. So
That's how much water, maybe not how much the soil takes up.
right, that's how much
If it's
is
steep and
delivered.
it's clay, most of that water's not going to absorb, it's just going to run over it.
Yeah, the crop isn't going to use all 3 inches of that water, but that's how much is delivered.
Heidi, do you have a question?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, my question is, if I want to revert from flood irrigation, let's say, to drip, is that possible? Is that how efficient is that going to be?
It's typically very efficient. And it's generally only possible if you have access to the water continuously or on demand. If you're on a flood irrigation system where you only have a rotational water, where you only have water.
Yeah, in this case, is the Medford Irrigation District.
Okay, so yeah, you should, if you're on the main canal,
Yeah.
that should be no problem. And they'll let you do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right.
Heidi,
Thank
we can get you Paul's contact information too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Well, so much of this depends on scale, right? And then what you're actually doing on the surface of it. I mean, irrigating for hay is totally different than row crops, and it's going to be different than an orchard. It's going to be, I mean, so.
So this, I put this up here to demonstrate how the flood irrigation is delivered to the property. So that's what you look at when you're doing the rotation, or if you're wondering, why am I turning on for 10 hours? Why do I only get 5 hours? It's because they figured it out based on this, based on giving you about 3 inches of water. Regardless, and that's based on a average water consumption of evapotranspiration of about 0.3 inches a day in the middle of the summer and 70% efficiency.
So a lot of farms around here, people have retainment ponds. so that they're not dependent on just what's coming down the ditch that very moment.
Yeah, that's what I was, yeah.
Okay, so I've got two ponds.
Right.
Okay, I got the big pond which has a canal that runs all the way to the front. It's a little pond, and that's where the pump is. That pressurizes the risers that runs the wood. So I was supposed to be increasing the volume of the pond this year, but it wasn't the money available. After watching two guys get a bulldozer stuck in there, and that's where they were. So yeah.
Right, you're getting this.
And you flood, huh?
I do both.
Do you both? And are you running pipe? Or you got a gun, or what do you guys
Hand lines.
do? You
The part I flood that has a lot of clay, the lower part I sprayed for, it's like river bottom.
is it?
Yeah, it's too flat. Yeah. So to put that into perspective, the typical delivery every 2 weeks could be up to 100,000 gallons of water per acre every 2 weeks. It's typical delivery of water is about 3 inches of water. So when people are talking about saving gallons of water in ag, that's really small potato.
So
We're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions of gallons.
how many gallons are in a foot acre of water?
So an acre foot of water has 326,000 gallons.
Thank you.
All right, next slide. So here's another flood irrigation option, gated pipe. It could be aluminum or PVC, or it could even be this flexible poly tube that folks use to see if gated pipe is going to work on the field. You roll it out, it's like this flexible tube, you poke holes in it. There's usually used aluminum gated pipe, potentially from folks like Jaded and Kearns out of Atlanta. Most new gated pipe is PVC with PVC gates. And gated pipe is just instead of an open ditch here, you've got this pipe that has water in it, and you've got these little gates, and you can open and close those different sets, different amounts at a time to get water where you want. It controls that, it stops the erosion at the beginning. But once it leaves there, same control as before. So it looks like.
Well, that's only going to work if you have a slope away from your pipe, so it can go all the way down the rows. I mean, if it's flat land or a slope around, it's just going to pool up there, right?
Yeah, you can't flood irrigate a field if it's 100% flat, really. Then it's a rice paddy.
So the gated valve is just a different way of doing flood irrigation.
So this one, they used to have just a ditch here, and then they put in gated pipe. And they still flood irrigate on this non-laser leveled area, it still slopes pasture clay. But now they just don't have to deal with maintaining, going out there with a shovel and putting a block of sod in the ditch and cutting the checks out. And especially this when they have cattle, and the cattle don't mess with the gated pipe as much as they mess with the open ditch. They'll degrade the open ditch. So less labor, less okay gain, small gain in actual irrigation efficiency.
What about lifespan? Because now you've got white PVC out in the elements, and how long does it last?
So white PVC out in the elements over time will degrade, but it won't like fall apart or disintegrate. It generally becomes a little bit more brittle. So if something hits it, it'll crack more easily when it's older. But it can last, 25 to 50 years out there still.
So you're still investing in something that's going to has a fairly long lifespan.
Yes. Yeah, you are.
Well, with environmental concerns, has there been like a environmental cost benefit assessment to which of these, so far as materials, manufacturing, pollution, carbon footprint? I mean, we're throwing around totally different types of systems, and they're all going to be sourced from different places, manufactured with different materials.
Ideally, if you can have the labor and the time to manage your open ditch, open irrigation system that doesn't have any of those materials, that would be ideal. But there's less and less labor available.
And that also has to do with scale again.
Less and less art form, less and less experience. This doesn't take as much experience. You can say, hey, you can be away and call someone and say, hey, can you open up the gates on the first 5 sections of pipe for 3 hours and close those, you know. It's not as much like, oh, I put the notch in here, my notch is not having enough water, so I'm gonna move this rock over here a little bit.
Because I can remember working with my
Yeah.
father-in-law in Moses Lake in a field, and basically these old guys, they just have a little water trickling down, they go with the shovel, and they throw a little dirt on that ditch, and move a little bit from that one, flood these rows for X amount of time, and I mean, it was all just a guy walking around with a little shovel and
Yeah.
flipping.
So you're trading a lot of times the materials, the cost of materials for labor. Is, you know, you want to put more materials on here to reduce your labor, ideally, to get, ideally also more distribution uniformity and more efficiency. Right next slide.
And one thing I don't see on that though is, okay, I've got a gated ditch. You open the port, to get it to spread out, then you have a little secondary ditches that you put in. And even that would, I would think you'd still need to have those secondary.
Yeah, I'll show you the next picture if you go next.
Okay.
This one?
All right, now go back. There's another picture in here back here. If I go forward,
Okay,
it'll be later down there.
okay.
But this is a way to get, you know, started on the gated pipe. It could be out of this concrete ditch here, out of a regular earthen ditch. Could go into a box where you got these different controls here. This one could go down the field to where your other spreader ditch was. And there could be another gated pipe down there in the middle of the field. Right next to them. Talk a little bit wild flood irrigation. This is just a tarp put up and then the water spills out over the ditch bank. And then that tarp is moved down the ditch, or a new tarp is set up, usually about 100 feet at a time.
Do people move that flooded the gated pipe around?
Typically not.
So then when you're mowing, haying, tilling, all that stuff's right in the middle of your field.
Potentially.
Okay.
But there's not a lot of it out there. So there's going to be, you know, 500 to 1,000 feet between gated pipe sections. And instead of a ditch where you wouldn't be tilling anyways, now it's a pipe.
Okay.
So the wild flood, here's another one. It's just 2 ditches. This one goes further around the hill. This one flood irrigates this section. There's this concrete distribution box here. Right next slide. Flood irrigation layout again. This one's got the gated pipe, like we were talking about, David. So they got gated pipe up here, and everything right next to the gated pipe looks pretty well irrigated, and the distribution is good.
Yeah.
But as you get further down, because they didn't laser level the field, you still get these dry spots. But then they have another gated pipe here and another one here. And they've got, you know, the pipeline that comes down here and feeds these gated pipes. So that's the way that they did it, but still,
And that's all gravity. They don't have a
That's
pump
all
pressurizing
gravity.
that system. Okay.
yeah, that's all EPID, all gravity. It helps with this labor, helps keep those ditches clean because they're pipes now. But the amount of efficiency gain, not a huge amount. Border strip irrigation is another way to do it. If you've got some nice flat areas. And it's basically, these berms could be a couple hundred feet apart and you flood that strip for a certain amount of hours. And then you move all your irrigation to the next strip, called border strip. Next slide. For example, a border strip, it's hard to see, but they had borders coming down here that was about 100 feet apart, little berms, maybe about a foot, half a foot high. And they would open up the ditch and send the entire ditch down that border strip until it got maybe 3/4 of the way down. And then they would move that whole amount of flood irrigation water to the next border strip. And it makes it efficient in a way because the water can't move laterally as much and cause big wet spots. They really force the water to move all the way to the end of the field using those border strips. Next slide. Some other methods, subsurface plowing, key lining, different ways to just keep water up on the hillside. Okay, next slide. So flood irrigation slopes. You were talking about slopes earlier. You got an open ditch and you've got a larger canal, you might have 1 foot of drop for every 1,000 feet of length. Well, in smaller ditches, and what I've measured is about 2 or 3 feet of drop per 1,000 feet of length for these ditches. So that's 0.2, 0.3% slope. So we're basically flat. If you need to reestablish contour ditch in the field, about 1/4 of an inch for every 10 inch or 10 feet is a good rule of thumb. If you need to move water from one place to another in your field, it's a small ditch. Next slide. Getting water out of the canal, you can use different checks. 800, 300 feet. Next slide. Here's another look at that distribution box. They had a check here. They've got checks here. They can send water this way, that way, that way. Next slide. This slide, there's a bunch of contour ditches in here that seemingly be placed in random locations. But actually what happened is over many years of the irrigator being out there on the field, he found that this is the best place to put these contour ditches to spread the water around as he needs to. And this is a hay field, there's no livestock out there. So his contour ditches are able to stay nice and clean and clear, but he does have to weed eat them and spray them with herbicide every year to keep them clean enough to push water through them. But there's pretty good distribution in here, except for there's a bunch of these contour ditches. This is good flood irrigation. They spend a lot of time out here, sometimes waking up every 2-3 hours a night when the flood irrigation turn is on to move water from this side of the ditch and then move it down to here, or to go out here and check the end of the field to see if water's reached it yet, to see if they can turn the field, because it's different throughout the season. It's different in the spring versus the end of the summer. It's a constant curve, yeah.
So he's got a pond though. If he wanted to sprinkler this, he could. Would it be, I mean, what would be the benefit of turning it into sprinklers instead of
So this is like
flood
100
irrigation?
acres, and putting in a new sprinkler system and a pump
For
would be like
100
$5,000 an acre. And he didn't want to spend
that much money.
$500,000.
So there's a lot of electric. over there.
Right. And,
So
and that,
economically, he was able to get enough hay to support the operation, and he was living on the property full time and was a good active flood irrigator. Okay, next one. Good question.
That's a key statement there, good active.
Yeah, being active makes it more efficient, but if you're not active, you can go away.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's all about management of flood irrigation. So this one, another picture of that one, just to show that poor flood irrigation on pasture because of the livestock, and less active irrigation management. Well, so there's a little ditch coming down here with these little cross pipes, and those pipes are used to either put a board in front or put the tarp in front to spread, to get water up out of the ditch and onto the field. So there's another picture of a ditch with another kind of lateral ditch. They put a board in front of this culvert to push water this way, and then they have the tarp here for this set for a certain number of hours until water, usually the amount of hours is based on where the water is at the end of the field because it varies so much. So usually a good rule of thumb is about 3/4 of the way down the field. Once you see the water there, then you can switch sets. Because even though you switch sets and move water, there's still water coming down the beginning of the flood irrigated field that's going to push the water the rest of the way to the end. Also, there's like a house out here in a road, and they don't want to flood out those guys. Pressure requirements for flood irrigation is lowest pressure. Sometimes you see pumps that pump up from the river into the flood irrigation ditch, but that's still super low pressure. You're just getting water up a little bit. You can use a trash pump. Gated pipe requires a little bit of pressure, but not very much. You got to be able to push water out of those gates. But really, low pressure, lowest energy requirements for flood irrigation. Next one. Filtration for flood irrigation is pretty much minimal, except for the fish stream at the beginning of the ditch. Next slide. Pressurized irrigation types, as opposed to flood, is you can really irrigate where you want, because you can move the sprinkler around easily, and you know exactly that's where the water's gonna go. You can irrigate when you want to. You can turn water off and then water stops flowing. Flood irrigation, you've got so much water on the field, you can't just stop it. It's just out there. And there's different pressurized options, high labor, low cost options, and low labor, high cost. Next slide. There's different filtration required on the pressurized system to prevent clogging, more so than the flood irrigation. You can pressurize your irrigation with gravity. So if your ditch is up on a hill and you've got about 100 feet of drop, you've got enough pressure to run most sprinkler systems. PVC pipeline choice for pressurized systems. Usually I don't like to put in any pipe that's less than 125 PSI rated PVC pipe, just because it's really thin and it's hard when you're installing it. It's just really, can be really flimsy sometimes. Just a thicker pipe is just a little bit more robust and lasts longer. So I'm going to go over a bunch of different sprinkler irrigation setups, pressurized irrigation. Here's a hand line on some type of new row prop. The whole hand line on this one is all above ground. So put it out there, irrigate, and then they remove the whole, all the hand line, all these moving pieces when they go cultivate or go harvest. So it can be, that previous picture was PVC, was aluminum hand line. This is a PVC, new PVC hand line. It's called Certiset. It's flexible. It's got these twine gaskets so it doesn't leak. And it lasts. It's got even built-in UV protection in there, so it's yellow. And it's got the new stuff people are going to if they're trying to increase the efficiency from the aluminum stuff that tends to leak sometimes versus this new stuff.
Is it lighter than aluminum?
No, but they can have special tractors to cultivate and move this around with it. They can pull the whole thing and they can like move it around with the tractors. Next slide. Picture of a riser valve for your hand. So you got a 4-inch, only 4-inch riser coming up with a valve on it, and you attach on this elbow.
That's my setup.
Yeah. So that's pretty typical setup. Next slide. Here's an aerial photo of hand lines. Out there, they've got all the hand lines out here for different row crops. Super flexible. Turn the water on.
I keep running across people in the valley that used to run hand line on my farm when they were kids. Middle-aged guys are like, oh yeah, when I was 14, oh, I was running.
Yep, that's what that free labor. All right, next slide. Row crops, it can be a cheap option. Sometimes there's used hand lines out there. Flexible system. Next slide. Different sizes, talk to the contractor. Horses can just stomp aluminum hand line if they're bored. Be careful. Manually moving the lines is tough and sometimes it leak. Next slide.
So why can't you move the aluminum lines like you can the PVC, just because they're a lot more brittle, or
Yeah, if you try to like lift it up, it could
it
kink.
depends on itself?
Yeah, whereas the PVC is like just more flexible. This is pod irrigation. This is K-line pods. It's a long string of HDPE pipe, like a big drip hose. And then there's this sprinkler stubbed into it.
Is that relatively new?
Yeah, it was developed in New Zealand maybe 10, 15 years ago. And there's this protective housing around it. You can see here, it's just a hard plastic housing. And these are generally used for pasture. They're, protected from the livestock. You can grab onto the end and drag it around wherever you like, so it can really fit in any odd shaped field or on a slope.
But what's the diameter of the water line there? It doesn't look like it hardly have any kind of volume compared to.
Yeah, you can usually only fit maybe 10 sprinklers on one line, but the line is moved all the time. So, and you move it with a quad while it's irrigated. So hand lines, you have to drain them out before you move them. These ones you can keep the water on and just drag them around while they're irrigated.
What kind of pressure would be
These ones, you needed 30 PSI at the upper sprinkler.
That was like pumping.
Yeah, you need a pump or enough
Head pressure.
head pressure. Yeah, about maybe 100 feet head pressure. Yeah, next slide. Here's how it's connected. There's a swivel riser that's connected to the pipe under there so it can swivel around. So here's how you move it around. You start up here, move it, grab it, move it down. And then the next one, you move it again. Usually have like 8 sets per pod line. And so it's pretty cheap because you're out there moving it all the time. But you get to ride your quad, and if it's hot outside, you might get a little wet from the water. If the water's clean, that's cool. If it's not clean, you probably wear goggles.
So how long are you leaving it per set?
You might leave it 12 hours a set. To put down maybe an inch.
Most of the kaolin I've seen, you're not putting out near as many gallons per minute as my rainbows are.
Well, they
Right.
kind of-
They're smaller.
Yeah.
You usually have to run them longer. So like your rainbirds on your hand line, you might do 8-hour sets. These ones you might do 12 hours. And usually they don't spray as far. So each one of these rectangles is 45 feet apart. But like on a hand line, they might be 60 feet apart.
Well,
Or 40 feet.
most of your hand lines are 40 feet.
40 by 40.
Well, yeah, you have a head every 40 feet.
And then do you move it 60 feet to the next riser?
Yeah, that's how far I go, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so these ones, each of the pods is about 40, 45 feet apart. But then you also only move it 40, 45 feet because it's a smaller sprinkler. You can get some of the bigger sprinklers, but then you gotta, this seems to be like the happy medium that they figured out. Next slide. Here's an example of pod irrigation design. They've got pods up there, up above talent. Next one. Here's one that was put in. You can see the aerial of where the pods are sitting like currently, where they're irrigating, they have different lines. And then they rotate them around.
Seems to be very effective.
Yeah, they're tough to get a good coverage because you're moving them all the time. And if you don't move it right to that specific spot, you can get some dry spots in between.
Well, you know,
So
if you're doing multi-day irrigation, sometimes the weather can change when you start on one part of the field before you get to the other.
Yep.
I mean, the conditions in which you're irrigating, I mean, this is a dynamic, this is not a
Yeah.
static.
and on this specific field, they really found that their flood irrigation previously was pretty terrible. They switched to this pod system because it worked out for their livestock, for the slope, for the funky shaped fields and the cost. And they actually got an increase in production by like 20, 30%. Just because they were more uniform with the water, they were able to get water to all the dry spots they couldn't reach with the flood.
20% more hay or 20% more volume of the cattle, 20% more milk, what are you talking
They
about?
hayed a portion of this, 20% more hay.
Okay,
Good question. But they also found out that they were using their quad all the time and they had to buy an extra quad, like in a couple of years, because they were burning out the quad.
that's much, yeah.
Right, next slide. So less labor, more or less. Open pasture, you got a buried PVC to each one of the rifles. Next slide. Generally animal proof. Doesn't leak. Or some wheel line. This is a wheel line. It's a basically aluminum hand line on wheels with a mover. Right, next one.
Is that move itself?
Yeah.
These don't move themselves. You have to drain the whole pipe, and then you go stand by the motor and you move it, and you make sure that it's walking where it needs to. Sometimes, the wheel could get hung up on something and then the whole thing will turn. And you got to be there to stop it if that.
Then it messes up and it's really hard to fix after that.
Yeah, some of them have solar panels on them, but that really just means battery power. So you don't have to turn a motor on to run. This is battery power. Next one. Yeah, so the solar one versus a regular one. Next one. Connect it to a similar riser with a flexible hose sometimes, or you can use aluminum line. Next one. Apparently the best way to operate wheel lines is to skip a set and then come back on odd sets. And that gives you just more coverage, better coverage. and it allows the sprinklers to work a little bit better. And that's from this reference here. They did a bunch of tests on this and they actually went from, they skipped the riser and then on the way back. And that also stops you from having to go down and then spend a bunch of time trying to walk the whole thing back in one time. You're moving it down and then you're walking it back and you're moving it down. So,
Would they recommend the same pattern for running hand lines?
I would imagine, potentially,
Well, there's all kinds of.
but I haven't looked up yet. Hang on.
You can see
It might-
how, you can
it
see
might-
how on the intermittent,
it
it
might-
puts quarter coverage on that on the end of it rather than head to head, now it's quarter coverage.
In my particular field that I am on, it's about 16 acre field, and my main line runs right down, basically the middle. So when I start, one line's at the back, and then on one side, this one's at the front. Every day you move this one set this way, this one this way, and when you get to the end, I drag all the pipes across that way, and then this way you're basically doing a circle around the field. That way because if you just start going back the other way, you're irrigating stuff that just got irrigated. See what I mean?
Exactly. So like same
It's a
thing
lot
with this
more
one.
work, but
Yeah.
it works out.
Right, next one. The aerial wheel lines, and you can see sometimes if you don't have enough pressure or if the nozzles are worn out and you're not getting a good throw distance on your sprinklers, you can have dry spots between each of your sets where the sprinklers aren't overlapping enough. Right, so. Great for hay, because you can get a lot of water down pretty quick. So after, your hay's all dried up, raked up and baled, and you get it off, then you can really irrigate everything pretty quick with the wheel lines. So usually bigger sprinklers. Also, when the hay is really tall, the wheel line is a little bit taller and doesn't knock everything down like a pod line would. A lot of wheel lines out there are tried and true methods, irrigation. Next one. You have to drain the whole thing. You should usually a lot like an hour every time you move it. So take that labor into consideration with the wheel. Big gun sprinklers, there's traveling big guns, stationary big guns, solid set big guns. Big gun is just a fancy term for big impact sprinkler. Next slide.
Pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, this is a Kifco water reel. There's a bunch of mechanical parts in here that could go wrong. But generally you pull it out and then you set the speed on here and it'll drag it back at a certain speed based on how much water you want to put down. So if you want to put down 2 inches every pass and make it slower, if you want to just do 1 inch, you go a little faster.
Do you know what size Kim's is?
Pardon me?
Do you know what size Kim's big gun is up there?
No, I don't.
Because that thing it's impressive.
Yeah, there's some massive
I
ones.
mean, it's like 7 times the size of that.
Yeah, there's some big ones on the way up to Lost Creek Lake. Right before you get up there, but yeah, this one's being used like in the garden, and it's in the winter time. You just put it all in the garage and bring it out and attach it to a flexible riser. They can be okay, but they're like I said, there's a lot of mechanical parts and they're pretty expensive.
Does the water pressure move it?
The water pressure can move it, or they can be moved by a motor, separate motor. But generally, the water pressure moves, so you do need higher pressure sometimes at the beginning.
So
So you got to run all that water through the hose before it gets to the sprinkler.
what is the green line next to the black line?
Maybe that's an electrical line.
That's what I was wondering. So that isn't electric.
Yeah.
Extension cord.
That's
Yeah.
right. So this is a real picture of these big guns that pulling out here and then they're dragging all the way
Yeah,
back.
that's the big one for your second.
Those
Oh, yeah.
ones.
I mean, they're not.
And you have to have a path for them to go. They can't just go over a bunch of vegetation. You have to clear a path. Next slide.
Uh-oh. Hang on.
It's gonna be stationary. Too. You can bury line.
Oh,
I got some pictures of those.
Okay.
This is big gun cart. It doesn't have the fancy mover. It's just a cart and it's attached with a flexible hose or with a aluminum line to your riser. And you move those around wherever you need to. You see some of those in parks sometimes. And we just want to have one big sprinkler that irrigates a bigger area at a time.
MERS has
Less
those,
labor.
doesn't he?
Yours says, permanent,
It's got-
Okay.
it's got buried line.
But this one, You don't need as much pressure for this one because you don't have a big wheel. You know, you maybe need still 60 PSI for this one. Next one. Solid set big guns. It's all buried lines with a steel riser coming out with a solid big gun. There could be a control on here that's radio controlled or anything. It's just it could be a really large, like backyard sprinkler system that's on timers. Super expensive. Next slide. And if you have low pressure, your pump is worn out, you're still going to get some brush wells. Or if you don't have correct overlap, like these sprinklers might not have been close enough together. And here you can actually see it running. I think this is a gun cart one. It pulls back here, and then their other set is this other one here, where the big gun pulled all the way back. So they're able to do this whole field with just two sets. Next slide. You know, pasture hay, lots of sports fields, large lawns, and big things like that. The risers, not totally animal proof. Usually need higher pressure for the big guns to throw water further. If you've got any bare soil around, these will cause runoff and problems with the soil. So you really need some type of pasture or perennial crop system for the big guns. And you might need a quad or a tractor to move them around if it's big enough. Yeah, next slide. We're going to some micro sprayers, like a little miniature sprinkler. They use a lot under orchards. Basically a miniature version of the solid set big guns. Next one. Give an example of how it's set up. You have your buried PVC main line. And then you have a flexible hose coming off at each tree line with your micro sprayers set near the trees. Next slide. Pretty efficient. Used for orchards because you can go under the tree and you don't get the canopy of the orchard wet, so you don't. It reduces the bacteria.
Well, it keeps your fruit dry too.
Yeah, keeps your fruit dry, reduces pesticide or fungus problems. Pretty high installation cost. There's just a lot of little sprinklers in there, a lot of pipe going in. You can automate it really well. It can be low pressure. Next slide.
Hang on, gotcha, thank you. Thanks,
Thanks,
thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Right, next one.
Okay. Oh, now I gotta hit the
There's a lot of different irrigation types.
linear move.
When you move, so like a wheel line, except this one is all moved automatically. And this moves, you set the timer on it to move based on how much water you want to irrigate with. So the slower you have it running, the more water you'll put down at a time. The faster it's going, the less water you'll put down. And it just moves along. And this one, like the linear, they can have a GPS system on it to keep them in line, or you can have a buried like tracking line, and this arm comes out and it stays over the tracking line, so it knows if it starts to bury.
What does something like that cost?
This one is probably $80,000.
And then how much infrastructure not in that photo is required to maintain that?
So you have the risers. This flexible hose connects to a riser, and you have risers spaced maybe every 120 or 100.
So you customize your underground irrigation for this delivery system.
You could easily transition from a wheel line system to a linear move system because you have the risers, you've got the PVC in place.
Just a different version of the same thing.
Yeah. Excellent. Here's another linear with what they call a moon suction thing that pulls water right out of it. But I haven't seen any of these. This is not from around here. Next slide. This is a wheel line in Central Point, or excuse me, linear move in Central Point. And the main drive unit is in the middle, and they've got their risers in the middle of the field, and they're able to irrigate all of this automatically in a way. More or less. It goes a certain amount, but then it stops itself, it turns off, and you have to go physically move the connection hose from the last riser up to the next riser. Next slide. Okay, thanks. Yeah. All right. Center pivot, basically a linear move that rotates around a center point. It's a lot cheaper because it doesn't have like the GPS units and stuff.
And this is what they,
None of this is applicable for any of the people in this room.
No,
Well-
but it's something that's
Yeah.
good to know if you're talking about irrigation.
So
systems.
this
You know
is-
you don't want to.
this is what they have at 238 in Ross Anley, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
We got one of these.
This is what you see every time you fly over the Midwest. Yeah.
These are the most labor saving ones you can get, basically. They're worth spending the money on. They're very efficient, minimal labor. You just press a button and it wipes around.
Fixed
And
it.
so ultimately, if someone's looking for a flood or a sprinkler in the field, can you handle a center pivot?
But then
I
you,
would push for a center
but then
pivot.
you end up with a round field.
Well, you can do half circles and corners, and then you just miss the edges. But if you're willing to sacrifice the corner, the small corners, for low labor.
So then basically you have an automated system.
Yeah, low labor, really efficient. The center pivots look good, and that's why there's a ton of them.
Do they make them scale down?
Yeah.
Because the only ones I've ever seen are huge.
You can have one that's just this
One
thing
section?
that's just
Okay.
100 feet.
Oh. And what does something like that run?
So a small one might be about 40 or 50,000.
That's a lot of.
This one's probably, well, I don't know, but yeah, you can do really well, and your uniformity is perfect and super efficient, and you just press it on.
Is there a single one of those in the Applegate Valley? Is there a single one in Josephine County?
Yeah,
There's some-
yeah. So when you go into Medford and you turn onto Ross Anley, like you're going to Dick's Sporting Goods, that big field there has one of these.
Well, that's Jackson County.
Whenever
Yeah.
you're flying an airplane, you see the circular.
That's what I said. They're gonna do that.
Are they pumping out of wells more often than not? or-
Around here, you're pumping, you can pump right out of the river, or right out of the irrigation canal, right out of the farm. They don't have to be a well. So you bury the pipe from the middle to your,
Do you watch?
they got a bunch of center pivots over between the table rocks to our property, or cascade.
Uh-huh. To the branch.
So, and that's a picture, this is the one, this is, and then this is between the table rocks, cascade. So they were willing to sacrifice some of these edges for these super efficient, low labor. Excellent.
Does the water pressure move those?
No, it's electric.
So
So you have to bring three-phase power, but you can change the single phase to three-phase and then run it to pivot. Different sprays for the pivot for different things, and so you're based on the crop you're doing, you can have different sprays. Next slide. High capital costs, low labor costs, very automated, super efficient. They can be low pressure because you only need sometimes 20 PSI to sprinkle. You need electricity, and it's usually something that's going to be there for a long time. That could be a good selling point for your property.
So the pipe irrigation that has the sprinklers at the bottom, you lose a lot less in evaporation than when you're shooting it all the way through the air.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they're inherently more efficient.
Especially in windy areas.
Okay, yeah.
So if it's really windy, wind over 30 miles an hour. And if you've got sprinklers high up in the air on the top of your center pivot, you could lose over 50% of that water in the wind. But if you got your sprinkler down here, a foot above the ground,
Yeah, okay.
super efficient. So filtration requirements. Good rule of thumb is filter should be 2 to 5 times smaller than your sprinkler nozzle. Sprinkler nozzle diameter based on how often you're willing to clean the filter and how big the filter is. And
don't you have self-cleaning filters?
yeah, there's some self-cleaning filters out there.
Where do you get those?
Those are super expensive too. Generally, the ones that are good are like the turkey timer ones where it has a signal, it just pops up when you get a pressure differential across it. So you have 5 PSI loss in your filter, a little thing pops up, and then you can see it from across the field, and you can go and clean it out. figured out. So the filter capacity should be at least 2 times the flow rate of your system. Oh, my filter's not working, it's clogged all the time. Well, that means your filter's working. But if you have to clean it all the time, that means the filter's not big enough. So if you're cleaning it multiple times a day, you could probably double the filter size and put in another filter so you don't have to clean it once a day. Right, next. Intake filters and sprinkler filters, there's some in the creek here that are good enough for sprinkler filtration. This is one of the ones like the turkey timer one I was talking about. This little thing just pops up, like a little red deal. Next step. So I got some just general things about water volume calculations we can kind of breeze through. If you're interested in math or water volume, but I think I'm pretty much done talking about all the irrigation system stuff.
Well, thank you. You've been very, very kind to spending time with us here.
Yeah, and it's getting late, but yeah, we can see what else is on here. I want to talk
Grab
about.
one of your questions.
Yeah, of course.
And then we're meeting again when? Oh, yeah, you gotta find out more about the grant and then.
So drip irrigation systems, drip components.
Just wait for another email.
I don't think we're drip system setup, above ground drip systems. I don't think too many people are doing drip.
Well, yeah, well, I'll be up there working on this.
You're welcome to do the thing plan here too.
Pumps. So I'm just breezing through all these different pump photos I had and got any questions. Here's some in the Applegate specifically. There's one on a cart. So you can get the pump down to the creek. And then when the water level rises in the winter, you just wheel it back.
That's why we love our little irrigation.
Here's one that-
It's our ponds.
Yeah, I think it's one that Tom Fay might have done, but it's on like a skid that goes down because the pump can't be super far away from the water.
So of course you know Tom, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
so
what came out
there's that one.
and we did some of the work quite well.
Okay,
We got a new valve put in and had a built platform for it.
sure. So irrigation costs $2,000 to $10,000 per acre about. Quotes aren't totally free from irrigation contractors, but you can get some good quotes and some good info from irrigation contractors. Pumping costs. Expect to spend 2% of your sprinkler. So if you buy a sprinkler system that's, $100,000, you should expect to spend about $2,000 per year annual maintenance on your sprinkler system.
Like people love flood irrigation.
Yeah, flood irrigation is very cheap. And if you don't need the extra irrigation efficiency,
Yeah.
and if you're not going to get a good return on your investment, it might not be worth it.
So the neighbor from California that thought flood irrigation was the dumbest thing going. Now, he was from a vineyard background. This is
Yeah, it's hard to flood irrigate a vineyard. Yeah. No, I've seen a lot of good flood irrigation. I've seen a lot of bad flood irrigation.
I just thought it was antiquated. I didn't realize how many people are still pursuing it.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Is it moving forward now?
it's
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah.
Probably more labor intensive than the other things.
Well, and like you're saying, it's a skill set. All this stuff is a skill set. It's an observational engaged practice.
Okay.
You just gotta look and think repetitively.
Anything, if you're willing to put time in, the grass is greener on the other side kind of thing. If you're willing to spend time on your own grass, your grass can be green too. So it's all about the time. So for grants, for
It's about having the
on-farm,
money for the infrastructure we get to start off with.
right.
Jumping into farming is not,
And that's where these grants come in. So like NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, who used to be the Soil Conservation Service, they've got an EQIP program and multiple programs out there for farmers for investing in these capital improvements for irrigation efficiency, because they know that's a big hurdle to be more efficient and effective with the water resource. And so we can sometimes access this NRCS funding, and we have for different projects in the county. As long as there's enough folks grouped together, that makes it reasonable enough for NRCS to get involved with their large pocketbook. But it's really meant for on-farm improvements. And it's usually flood to sprinkler, and they usually require some percentage of efficiency gain. So like you can't switch from a hand line to a wheel line because you can't.
Well,
see
you
any-
said, right now, I've only got 40 acres, so but it's all flat.
That's a lot.
It's all flat bottomland.
Yeah.
And it has one set of risers that runs the entire width of the property.
Mhm.
And from there, we can put on soft pipe to hard pipe and do whatever we want to do.
Sure.
So I can't see any upgrades being that effective from that would trigger their wanting to give me money to.
Yeah, the only upgrade you could do would be if you put in drip, then the efficiency would
Don't do
be,
drip for hay. I mean,
they're doing a lot of subsurface drip now for hay. and
I'm
that
sorry,
could
what
be-
do I know? Okay,
For alfalfa,
I,
that could be like
I-
95% efficient, but that's, I'm just telling you what they would pay for.
yes.
And then, or they could do a center pivot.
Okay.
So switching from like a hand line, old hand line to a center pivot, because you can get 90% efficient with the pivot. Hand line, you can a reasonable 60-70% efficient.
They're
So
too old for this shit. Thank you very much. Great
that's the idea.
presentation.
I think
Great-
that's all.
you
That's a
guys are
super
great.
long.
I can't
blah,
thank
blah,
you
blah.
enough for all that you do.